You've been lied to your entire life. That's right, everything you were taught about Noah's Ark being just a fairy tale, a comforting bedtime story for kids, might be about to collapse right in front of your eyes. Because in the mountains of Turkey, something absolutely unexplainable has been found, and the scientists who saw it, they couldn't speak, literally speechless. Now I know what you're thinking. Here we go again, another clickbait Ark story. But hold on, because what if I told you the evidence for Noah's Ark isn't just a blurry satellite photo or wishful thinking from religious enthusiasts? What if the measurements, the location, the internal layout, everything lines up so perfectly with ancient texts that even the most hardcore skeptics are scratching their heads asking how this is possible? Here's the part that's been eating at you, maybe without you even realizing it. You want answers. You're tired of half-truths, tired of being told to just have faith or just trust the science without anyone actually showing you the proof. You've been stuck in this frustrating middle ground where religious leaders say one thing, scientists say another, and nobody gives you the full picture. You deserve better than that. You deserve to see what's actually been discovered, to understand why shocked scientists are rethinking everything they believed about ancient history, and to decide for yourself whether the Noah's Ark in Turkey claim is the real deal, or the greatest coincidence in archaeological history. And that's exactly what this video is going to give you. No filter, no agenda, just the raw, jaw-dropping truth about what was found and what it could mean. But here's where it gets wild, and why you need to pay attention to every single second. What they found inside this structure changes everything. We're not talking about empty space or random rock shapes. We're talking about compartments, organized sections, signs of engineering that shouldn't exist in the Bronze Age. The Noah's Ark discovery in Turkey isn't just about proving or disproving a Bible story. It's about rewriting what we think we know about what humans were capable of thousands of years ago. So here's my promise. By the end of this video, you'll have information 99% of people don't know. You'll see evidence that's been buried or brushed off by mainstream media, and you'll walk away with a totally different perspective on one of history's greatest mysteries. Ready to have your mind blown? Then let's dive in, because what you're about to learn will make you question everything. Imagine standing next to something so massive your brain can't even process its true size. That's exactly what happens when scientists try to wrap their heads around Noah's Ark's real dimensions, if it truly existed. We're talking about a vessel that, based on biblical measurements, would have been roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and about 45 feet tall. Put that into perspective, you could fit almost 2 football fields end to end inside this thing. Modern naval engineers have looked at these proportions and just stared, because here's the kicker. The length-to-width ratio is eerily close to what we still use today in shipbuilding. It's like someone back then understood hydrodynamics without ever sitting through a physics class. Now let's get practical for a second. Picture the Titanic. Yeah, that Titanic. Noah's Ark would have been about half its length. But here's where it gets even crazier. The internal volume would have been around 1.5 million cubic feet. That's roughly the equivalent of over 500 standard railroad boxcars worth of space. Shocked scientists have run these numbers again and again because we're not talking about a little wooden boat. We're talking about an ancient superstructure, floating in the middle of catastrophic waters during what the story calls the Flood. The sheer audacity of building something this big with Bronze Age tools makes you wonder if there's more to this mystery than we've been told. Think about it. Our ancestors supposedly pulled this off without cranes, without steel, without computer modeling. What really gets fascinating is when modern engineers test whether a design like this could actually work. Some have built scale models and tossed them into wave tanks, and guess what? It doesn't flip. The 6:1 length-to-width ratio creates insane stability even in rough conditions. It's not built to travel fast or go somewhere. It's built to survive, to float, to endure whatever nature throws at it. And when you compare the Noah's Ark site in Turkey, or what some believe to be it, with these engineering principles, you start seeing why this debate has never died. Whether you believe the design came from divine instruction or ancient genius, one thing is undeniable. Someone understood how to build something that could, at least in theory, survive a world-ending flood. And that alone should make you curious about what else they may have known. This is where it gets really interesting, because we're stepping into a battlefield that's been raging for thousands of years. Faith versus science. On one side, you've got believers who say divine intervention made it possible, that God guided Noah's hands and preserved the structure through miraculous means. On the other side, you've got skeptics armed with calculators, engineering degrees, and a long list of questions about wood stress limits and material fatigue. The truth? Both sides have legitimate points, and that's what makes this mystery so addictive. When shocked scientists began analyzing whether Noah's Ark could work from a pure engineering standpoint, they weren't trying to destroy anyone's faith. They were genuinely asking if Bronze Age technology could actually pull off something on this scale. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, wood, and the brutal limitations of using timber to build something the size of a modern warship. Wood warps, it splits, it rots. Especially when you're talking about a structure that has to survive not just rain, but months of relentless, apocalyptic flooding. Ancient builders knew this, which is why the biblical account says the ark was coated inside and out with pitch. Basically a tar-like waterproofing seal. That detail isn't random, it's critical. Think of it like sealing a bathtub, except your bathtub is nearly 2 football fields long and has to resist water pressure that could crush a submarine. Modern reconstructions suggest that multiple layers of pitch plus tight joinery could theoretically create a watertight seal. But here's the problem. Maintaining that seal under non-stop stress for months, that's where the debate explodes. Structural strength is where science and faith collide head-on. Engineers point out that wooden ships longer than about 300 feet tend to suffer from something called hogging, where the middle sags and the ends rise, eventually snapping the ship's backbone. The longest wooden ship ever built in modern history, the Wyoming, was about 330 feet and still needed iron reinforcements to avoid exactly that. So how would a roughly 450-foot ark survive without steel bracing? Believers say that's where divine providence comes in, supernatural preservation. Skeptics argue maybe the measurements are exaggerated, or maybe the ark had internal bracing we don't know about. What's undeniable is this: whether through divine help or forgotten ancient engineering, something about this story refuses to die. And that persistence alone suggests we're dealing with something more complex than a simple fable. Now let's step inside this massive structure and try to picture what the interior might have looked like. According to the biblical description, Noah's Ark wasn't one giant empty shell. It was designed with 3 separate decks, stacked like floors in a building. Picture a 3-story warehouse floating on water, except instead of pallets and boxes, you're organizing thousands of living, breathing, eating, and let's be real, pooping creatures. Each deck would have had a function, a deliberate organization that made the whole operation even remotely manageable. The bottom deck likely held the largest animals and the heaviest supplies to keep the center of gravity low. The middle deck probably housed medium-sized animals and additional provisions. The top deck may have been reserved for birds, smaller animals, and living quarters for Noah's family. That compartment system wasn't just smart, it was survival. Because you can't just toss lions next to lambs and hope for the best. The interior would have needed pens, stalls, cages, partitions, separating predators from prey, clean animals from unclean ones, and creatures with totally different needs. Some researchers studying the Ark evidence suggest the design could have included long corridors running the length of the ship. with individual compartments branching off on both sides, kind of like a giant barn or even a prison layout, but on a scale nobody had ever seen. That would have let Noah's family move efficiently through the ark, feeding and caring for animals without constant chaos or danger. And that level of planning raises a hard question. Who taught them to think like that? When you calculate the space, something surprising shows up. With about 1.5 million cubic feet of internal volume spread across 3 decks, you're looking at the equivalent of massive warehouse floors, enormous usable space. The Turkey Ark claim has reignited the old math about how many species could realistically fit inside. And here's the practical twist. You don't have to bring full-grown elephants. If you bring juveniles, or even very young animals, the space and food needs shrink dramatically. Most species would be smaller, easier to manage, and require less. Suddenly, what sounded impossible starts looking not easy, but not instantly ridiculous either. Basic separation could follow logical groupings. Herbivores together, carnivores isolated, aquatic creatures handled with specialized containers, and insects stored compactly with their food sources. Here's where it gets even more mind-bending, because we're not just talking about fitting animals inside, we're talking about keeping them alive for over a year. Start with a game-changing detail most people ignore. Noah didn't necessarily need to bring adult animals. Think puppies instead of Great Danes, lion cubs instead of 400-pound adult males. This isn't just speculation, it's smart survival strategy that can cut food needs by more than half and reduce space demands even more. Young animals are resilient, adaptable, and they'd have their entire lives ahead of them to repopulate after the waters dropped. Shocked scientists who've modeled this scenario found that using juveniles shifts the whole thing from absolutely impossible to insanely hard, but theoretically manageable. And that kind of practical thinking makes you respect whoever planned this, divine or not. Now let's tackle the feeding problem. Thousands of animals, every day, for months. The logistics alone would make running a modern zoo look like child's play. Grain eaters are the simplest. You store dried grain, seeds, hay, and other staples in sealed compartments. Carnivores are harder, but there are possible solutions. Dried fish, preserved meat, or feeding them animals that reproduce quickly, like rabbits or chickens. Water, surprisingly easier than most people think. With constant rainfall during the flood, collection systems on the roof could funnel fresh water into storage tanks. Some researchers suggest the Ark design may have included drainage and collection systems, almost like early plumbing, running through the decks. But here's what really keeps people up at night: waste. Thousands of animals producing waste every single day for over a year. Even with 8 people working non-stop, how do you stop the Ark from turning into a floating biohazard? Some theories propose sloped floors and drainage channels that moved waste toward collection points, possibly even out through ports. Others propose deep bedding systems, thick layers of straw or wood shavings that absorb waste and control odor, a technique still used in farming today. Disease and parasites would have been constant threats, but separation, airflow through the window mentioned in the text, and even natural antibacterial materials could have helped. Whether you believe it happened through careful planning or divine protection, one thing is clear: whoever thought through these details understood animal care at a level that challenges our assumptions about ancient knowledge. Imagine being sealed inside a massive wooden box while the entire world drowns outside. The biblical account says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, more than a month of non-stop downpour, thunder, rising water, chaos. But here's what most people miss: the rain wasn't the whole story. After those 40 days, the waters didn't immediately drop. Noah's family drifted for months. Some estimates put the total at nearly a full year before stepping onto dry land. Let that sink in. almost a year locked inside a floating zoo with no idea if land would ever return. No GPS, no forecast, no rescue, just faith and the constant presence of thousands of animals. The daily routine would have been brutal and monotonous at the same time. Wake up to dim light through a single opening. Feed animals for hours. Haul food and water. Clean waste. Check sick animals. Fix whatever broke overnight. Then do it again and again for months. No entertainment, no stepping outside for fresh air, just the constant creaking of stressed wood, the smell of animals, and the reality that everything outside those walls is gone. The Ark discovery might offer physical clues, but it can't capture the psychological weight of that confinement. It's the kind of isolation that would break most modern people fast. And then there's the silence, not the animal noise, but the silence of humanity. No voices, no ships, no signs of civilization, just endless water in every direction. Nights would have been the worst. Pitch black except for oil lamps, the Ark groaning as waves hammered it, never knowing if the next impact would crack the structure. Some historians argue the most miraculous part of the story might not be the Ark itself, but the mental survival of the people inside it. Whether you call it divine strength or extreme human resilience, one thing's certain. By the time the Ark finally scraped solid ground, they weren't the same people who entered it. So the waters finally begin to recede, and after months of drifting, the Ark comes to rest. But where? The Bible says the mountains of Ararat, and for centuries explorers and archaeologists have obsessed over one location, Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. This isn't a small hill. It's a massive volcanic peak rising over 16,000 feet above sea level, capped with snow and ice. The idea of a wooden ship ending up that high sounds insane. Until you remember we're talking about a flood described as covering the whole world. If water truly rose that high, Ararat becomes not just plausible, but one of the first major peaks that would reappear as the waters dropped. And that's where the obsession begins. In 1959, a Turkish army captain flying over the region spotted something strange. A boat-shaped formation near Mount Ararat in an area now known as Durupınar. Noah's Ark found. That's what some researchers claimed immediately. The formation measures around 490 feet long, strikingly close to the biblical dimensions depending on how you calculate ancient cubits. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and core samples have been taken, and the results are controversial. Some say they've seen signs of petrified wood, metal-like features, and organized internal patterns suggesting human construction. Others argue it's a natural geologic formation shaped by erosion and volcanic activity that just happens to look like a ship. The Ark in Turkey claim remains one of the most debated discoveries in modern archaeology, with both sides refusing to budge. But the situation gets even messier beyond science. That region sits near sensitive borders. Turkey, Armenia, Iran, Azerbaijan, areas tied up with politics, restricted access, and tight government control. Getting full excavation permits is extremely difficult. Even when teams gain access, they face harsh terrain, brutal weather, and altitude that makes oxygen scarce. Some expeditions rely on drones, satellite thermal imaging, and advanced radar instead of climbing. Others risk their lives crossing glaciers and jagged volcanic rock, and despite all the technology, there's still no definitive proof either way. It's almost like the mountain itself is guarding the secret, daring you to take a leap of faith or walk away from the mystery altogether. Now let's be brutally honest and look at what modern science says, because the critiques are serious and deserve a fair hearing. Structural engineers have run the numbers again and again, and they keep hitting the same wall. A wooden vessel that large, built with Bronze Age technology, would face catastrophic stress failure. We've already talked about hogging, the breaking the spine problem. But there's more. Massive waves in a global flood scenario would create twisting forces that could torque the hull and tear apart even the best joints. Modern scientists aren't trying to wreck anyone's beliefs. They're pointing out that every long wooden ship ever built in recorded history needed metal reinforcement to survive harsh conditions. Without steel bands, diagonal bracing, or at least widespread bronze fittings, the Ark would be fighting physics from day one. Then there's the geological question: where did all that water come from? And where did it go? Earth simply doesn't hold enough water to cover every mountain to the depths described. You'd need roughly 3 times the total volume of all today's oceans, lakes, rivers, and ice combined. Geologists have studied sediment layers, rock strata, and ice cores going back hundreds of thousands of years, and there's no sign of a single worldwide flood event. Regional megafloods, absolutely, plenty of evidence. But a global deluge that covered Everest. The geological record doesn't support it. Some propose it was a massive regional flood that felt worldwide to the people living through it. But even that gets heavily scrutinized once you dig into details. And then comes genetics and biodiversity, one of the hardest problems for a literal interpretation. If all life on Earth descended from Ark animals just a few thousand years ago, we should see a massive genetic bottleneck across species, a sharp, simultaneous collapse in genetic diversity. But that's not what we observe. Many species show genetic variation that takes hundreds of thousands to millions of years to develop. And biogeography raises even more questions. How did kangaroos end up only in Australia? How did sloths end up in South America? Why do isolated islands have unique species found nowhere else? These are tough questions, but confronting them doesn't mean throwing the story away. It means we're wrestling with one of humanity's oldest narratives using the tools we have today. The search for Noah's Ark has turned into an obsession. And like every obsession, it has a dark side. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, dozens of expeditions have climbed Mount Ararat with cameras, faith, and the dream of making the discovery of the millennium. Some came back with blurry photos of wood-like shapes trapped in ice. Others told stories of something massive buried in a glacier, only to lose the evidence or have it dismissed as natural rock. At those altitudes, in that terrain, your eyes and your camera can lie to you. Volcanic rock can look like petrified wood. A strange ridge can look like a hull. Erosion and freeze-thaw cycles can create shapes that feel intentional even when they're not. And where there's mystery, there's always someone willing to fake evidence for fame or profit. The history of Ark discoveries is packed with frauds that would be funny if they weren't so destructive. In 1993, CBS aired footage claiming to show the Ark's interior, complete with wooden compartments, and it was later exposed as fabricated, using footage from an unrelated site. There have been petrified wood samples that turned out to be modern timber, ancient metal fittings that were actually 20th century nails, and satellite images that were digitally manipulated. Opportunists have sold fake artifacts, charged thousands for exclusive expeditions to worthless locations, and written best-selling books built on evidence they basically invented. It's gotten so bad that legitimate researchers now face instant skepticism, even when they might have something worth studying. And then there's the heartbreaking part. People have died on that mountain. Some fell into crevasses, some succumbed to altitude sickness. Others vanished in blizzards while chasing Ark evidence. Some spent their life savings funding expeditions, wrecking families and careers for proof that always stayed just out of reach. One explorer claimed he found it multiple times and showed photos and samples, but died before any official verification could happen. His work remains controversial, dismissed by mainstream science, honored by believers as a martyr for truth. Even the Turkish government has swung back and forth, sometimes welcoming researchers, sometimes blocking permits for years. It's politics, faith, science, and desperation colliding on a frozen mountain where the truth whatever it is, remains buried under ice and time. Here's where it gets really interesting, because maybe we've been asking the wrong question. What if the flood happened, but not the way we imagine it? There's a theory that's gained serious traction among geologists and archaeologists in recent decades, and it centers on the Black Sea. Around 5600 BC, something catastrophic may have happened. The Mediterranean, swollen by melting glacial waters, breached a natural barrier at what's now the Bosphorus. The result would have been terrifying. Massive volumes of seawater pouring in day after day, flooding what was once a smaller freshwater basin. Coastal settlements could have been swallowed fast. People would have watched water rise with horrifying speed, forcing them to flee or drown. Now imagine you're a farmer living peacefully near that shoreline, and suddenly your entire world, your home, your land, people you love who didn't escape, disappears underwater in weeks. To you, that is a worldwide flood. Your whole world just ended. Survivors would carry that trauma and pass it down. Over generations, as people migrated and cultures mixed, the story could grow, change, and become mythic. A regional catastrophe becomes a global legend. In that scenario, Noah's Ark is real, not as a ship carrying every species on Earth, but as a vessel or vessels saving families and livestock from a very real, devastating flood. What makes this theory compelling is that it offers something rare, a middle ground that respects both science and story. Researchers have pointed to signs of ancient submerged coastlines, sediment layers, and evidence consistent with rapid flooding in that region. At the same time, believers can look at that and say, see, the flood story has a real foundation. It's not a literal globe-covering deluge, but it's not pure fiction either. It gives you a kind of cognitive relief. You can hold on to the core truth: catastrophic flooding, survival through preparation, warning and foresight, without having to defend the parts that crash into modern geology and biology. Maybe Noah wasn't saving every species. Maybe he was saving his family and the animals needed to rebuild. And honestly, that's still incredible. Here's something that might blow your mind. Noah's story isn't unique, not even close. If you dig into ancient texts from cultures that had little or no contact with each other, you'll find flood stories everywhere. The most famous is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian story that predates the biblical account by centuries. In it, a man named Utnapishtim is warned by the gods about an approaching flood and builds a huge boat to save his family and animals. Sound familiar? The similarities go deeper than vibes. Details like sending birds to see if waters receded, the boat landing on a mountain, and offering sacrifices afterward are strikingly close. Scholars have argued for over a century whether one story influenced the other, or whether both come from an even older source, and it doesn't stop there. The Greeks had Deucalion, who survived a flood sent by Zeus by floating in a chest for 9 days. Hindu tradition tells of Manu, warned by a fish deity about a deluge, building a ship to survive. Chinese legends speak of heroes battling a catastrophic flood. Indigenous peoples across the Americas, Pacific Island cultures, African traditions, South American civilizations, almost everywhere has a version of a world-drowning disaster and a survivor who escapes by boat. That global spread raises a haunting question. Did different cultures independently create similar stories? Or are these myths echoes of real catastrophic floods humanity experienced and never forgot? This is where the mystery gets profound. Maybe there wasn't one single global flood, but multiple massive regional disasters as the last ice age ended and sea levels changed. Communities that survived would pass down their stories, and over thousands of years, those stories could become the foundation myths we study today. The Ark discovery, in Turkey or anywhere else, might matter less than recognizing what the story represents. Nature's terrifying power, the need for preparation, and the resilience to rebuild after everything collapses. When you see Noah's Ark as part of a global tapestry of flood memories, it stops being only about proving or disproving one claim, and becomes about understanding how our ancestors processed trauma, preserved wisdom, and found meaning in survival. So here we are, at the end of this wild journey through one of humanity's most enduring mysteries. But here's the real question. What are you going to do with everything you just learned? Are you going to close this video and go right back to mindless scrolling, or are you going to let this story challenge how you think about history, faith, and the limits of human capability? Because that's what separates people who just consume content from people who actually grow. The willingness to sit with uncomfortable questions and let them change you. Whether Noah's Ark is real or not, whether it's sitting on a mountain in Turkey or living only in our collective imagination, the story forces us to face something deep. Our ancestors weren't stupid. They built, they survived, they passed down wisdom that outlasted empires. What are you building that will matter 4,000 years from now? Think about the engineers who studied these ancient proportions and found them shockingly advanced. Think about the survivors of the flood, real or mythic, who had to restart life from scratch with nothing but faith and grit. Now look at your own life. What floods are you facing? What storms are threatening to overwhelm everything you've built? And more importantly, are you building your ark, or are you just hoping the waters won't rise? Ask yourself right now, what's one area of my life where I've been ignoring warning signs, where I need to start building before it's too late? Maybe it's your health, your relationships, your finances, your spiritual life. Those shocked scientists weren't just stunned by the structure, they were stunned that someone had the foresight to prepare while everyone else thought he was crazy. Here's my challenge. Don't be a passive spectator of mysteries. Be the person who goes deeper, who questions everything, who refuses surface-level answers. Science and faith have argued over this for centuries, but you know what they share. They're both chasing truth with everything they've got. That's the energy I want you to bring into your own life. Stop waiting for someone to hand you answers. Start investigating, start building, start preparing for whatever floods may come. And hey, if this video made you think differently, if it challenged you, if it taught you something you didn't know, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and ring the notification bell, because we're just getting started exploring the mysteries that connect our past to our future. There's so much more to uncover, and I want you right here with me for every discovery. Are you ready to stop living on autopilot and start building your own ark? Then let's do this together.